tell you what, I know it's into January, but I'm about to hot to death up here. Beth says she has an empty seat next to her if anybody's looking for a seat. There you go. If anyone else has any vacant seats next to them, let us know, because we got some people still coming in. Father, again, we thank you for all that you have done, are doing, will do. We thank you, Father, that your presence is here with us. We thank you, Father, for being with us. We thank you for just blessing us just by being among us. And so as you move among us, Father, I pray that you will move upon us. As you heal us, Father, I pray that you will encourage us. As you restore, Father, I pray that you will provoke us to take up the sword of the Spirit and to face forward. No longer retreating, no longer turning our back to the enemy, but setting our face as a flint to walk into and to accomplish all that you've set before us to do in your name, according to your will and purpose, and not by our might, nor by our power, but by your Spirit. We thank you in Yeshua's name. Amen. Thank you, Gabriel. Appreciate it, sir. I think some people are moving upon you to move, so you might want to tell Becky. So, as the Lord leads. All right, we're going to go to our Torah portion called Beshelach. Beshelach, it's in Exodus chapter 13, beginning in verse 17. It says, "And it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. And so God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, or Yom Suf in Hebrew. And the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt." And though this is not really the focus of my topic today or what I want to discuss, I do want to just briefly mention this fact, that the God of the universe speaks of his people in this way. Even though I have delivered them from their bondage, if they see they're going to have to fight for the promise, they're going to want to turn back and go back into their bondage. That's pretty much what he said. So I'm going to take them the long way. There used to be a song back in the 80s called "Take the Long Way Home." Some of you remember that? So I know where you used to hang out then. Remember Ryan? Anyhow, he's going to take them the long way. Now, this is on the heels of bringing them out of Egypt, it says, with boldness and a high hand, which is to imply they came out not as a mob fleeing chaotically and in fear and in distress, but actually they came out marching, as in, as you would imagine, an army unit marching from one duty post to the next. And there were banners and there was singing and celebration. So this is the idea behind how they came out with a high hand. But when they came out this way, that is to demonstrate that they had no intentions on that day of returning to Egypt, because they were focused on getting to the promised land. It's just that the Creator recognizes, well, see, they don't really understand what's ahead. They don't understand everything that they're going to have to encounter. And if they see war, they're going to, many of them anyway, are going to want to turn around and go home. In fact, only after a few days of freedom, it's recorded for us that Israel is going to see the Egyptian army, the ones they thought they'd left behind, coming after them, and they're in hot pursuit. But this is a necessity, as it turns out. It's easy for us to see on this side of things. Brandon, if you wanted to, you could do something with that air that would make me very happy. Very, very happy. Robert's going to do it. Robert, you're going to make me very happy. Thank you. And if it's gets too cool for you, I'll recognize that when the sweaters and the blankets start going on. And so we'll try to, wouldn't it be nice to have a place where it was just nice all the time? Anyway. Well, apparently there's a few things we have to encounter first. Anyhow. So after only a few days of freedom, here comes Pharaoh. He's pursuing them. But again, this had to happen. This was a necessity because Israel's redemption is approaching a climax. And the adversary is not just going to let go without a fight. So though they're delivered from their bondage, they're still in some ways tied to Pharaoh. And as a result of that, still being linked to Pharaoh. And remember what Pharaoh means. It's not just a person. It's not just a man. It's not just an Egyptian king. But actually that word means great house or a big house. It's an idea. It's a philosophy. It's a mindset. It encompasses quite a bit. And so they were still tied to all of those things that all of them had grown up being familiar with. And so if they were going to truly be a set apart people to live in a promised land, they had to be that link and that connection to Pharaoh and Egypt. It had to be complete and it had to be final. Their familiarity with Egyptian ways had to be severed. Because even though Pharaoh was dead, long after that, they're still looking back to the things that pertain to Egypt. And so then all of that is to say that the quickest route to the land of Canaan was also the quickest route for them to return to Egypt. And so he's going to take them the long way to work out the Egypt that had been living in them. My understanding is it is possible on foot to make the journey from Egypt to the land of Canaan in just 11 days. It was that close. But it seems to me that one of the things that this teaches us is the Father never, ever, 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 ever takes his people on the shortest, most direct route. Nor does he take us on the easiest path there is. He always, this is my observation, this is my experience, it seems anyway, he always takes us the longest route and the hardest way. And he knows that like people before us, there are things within us that have to be worked out. Abram was not taken out of Babylon directly to Mount Moriah in the test that he had to face there. He had to go down to Egypt. He had to deal with some things. Some things had to be worked out so that Avram can become Avraham. So the man that tells the Egyptians that Sarai is my sister becomes the man that is willing to lift up his only son upon that altar and to present the promise back to the Father. So he had to learn to trust God without reservation before he could go to Mount Moriah. And the children of Israel had to trust God before they could go into the land of Canaan. They had to sever the idea that they looked to Pharaoh to take care of them. That had to be broken. And so you and I, we have to learn to trust God without reservation before we're going to walk into that, the fruition of what he's promised us, whether it's a family or a congregation. So Israel had to learn to trust God before going into the land, because in the land, what do you have? You have giants, you have fortified cities, you have Philistines, you have all those kinds of things. That, and I've mentioned this before, that the Creator didn't just magically cause to disappear. I don't know about you, but there are things, there have been and are obstacles in my life that I wish he'd just, snap his fingers or whatever he wants to do and just move them out of my way. Unfortunately, I have not found one time in my life that he's done that. He's always required Beth and me to face those things head on, to trust him that if we go up against it, he's going to go before us, he's going to be our rear guard, and he's going to allow us to overcome those obstacles and those things. And so it is that the generation that eventually did go into the land of Canaan had to face the same giants, the fortified cities, and all the adversaries that their parents and grandparents were unwilling to face. It's just the way it is. Now, also, remember, these are people that, as far as we know, Egypt is all they have ever known. That's what was familiar to them. They weren't familiar with the land of Canaan. They weren't familiar as far as an experience with this promise. They knew about it, but they'd always relied on Pharaoh. They'd always relied on Egypt for their sustenance, even though they were in slavery. So, trying to boil it down here, To fight for a place you've never been, never seen, never experienced is a pretty tall order as long as you're still connected to everything that you've always been familiar with. So he doesn't take them the short route. He takes them the long way. Again, I'll speak for myself or from my own perspective. I want the Father's will in my life. I do. I desperately want his will to be performed in my life. It's just that I struggle with wanting him to do it on my time frame. I don't guess I'm the only one with that, with some of the looks that I'm seeing right now. We think we're ready for something right now, but it might be that there's still more to learn. A lot of people that are in this walk, this movement, this awakening, whatever we want to refer to ourselves as, Messianics or observant. You know what? I'm just a believer trying to follow Yeshua. Whatever that is, that's what you can call me, okay? But the point is, we come out of Babylon, and we think we've left Babylon behind, and the reality is we've kind of brought some of Babylon along with us. We've kind of drugged some of our baggage along with us. For example, this is something, if you pay close attention, you'll catch yourself doing it, as well as catching others doing it. We'll apply the Hebrew lifestyle with a Greek mindset. May I say that again? I think I will. We'll apply the Hebrew lifestyle with a Greek mindset, because we'll put emphasis on what it looks like rather than what does it do. Form versus function. You're going to hear that again and again and again and again until the day I die. That is something I'm going to keep working at and hammering away in my own life as well as the life of this congregation. We have in times past looked on the outward appearance more so than what was on the inside. All right? So what I'm saying here is, yeah, we're trying to live the Hebrew lifestyle, but sometimes we approach it with the Greek mindset. Now, there are those who eventually realized in doing what I just described, all we've done is left one religion and embraced another. We're just making something the Father's doing into another religious exercise. There are those who don't go that route. They just return to what they were. They go back to Egypt, so to speak. And then there are others who just give up altogether. They just quit. But those who will persevere in this journey as he's taking us through all these different experiences and trials and challenges and things like this, those who persevere are going to be those who have learned to trust him in spite of what's going on. Even when he takes us down a path that we never expected to be on. I would dare say that most of you in this room are right now experiencing something that you never expected to be experiencing. And by that I mean, when, I'm assuming most anyway, were raised in church. And so when you were first started out in that relationship with the Father in church, how many of you expected to be here on Shabbat? How many of you expected to give up your shrimp cocktails, catfish, and all that kind of stuff? Very few of us, right? We never saw this coming. I don't think most of us did. I certainly didn't. But the point is, we have to trust him that if we find ourselves on that path we never expected to be, and we feel that tug, we feel that pull, then know this. If he was good enough to put you on this path to bring you to this point, he's good enough to take you the rest of the way. If you've trusted him thus far, we can't stop trusting him now that he will take us the rest of the way. Because the one who began a good work, what? He's got to finish it, right? Now, we have a responsibility in this as well. We must remain faithful. So we need to, if we haven't already, we need to kind of get out of the idea of just having our eyes on the promised land, so to speak. I'm not saying that we should not look to that. When they left Egypt with a high hand, they're celebrating, waving flags, dancing, all these things, going out in orderly ranks. Guarantee you, none of them foresaw what was about to happen in just a few days. I don't even think Moses knew exactly. I really don't. They've got their eyes on the promised land. They've got their eyes on the goal and on the objective. And that's what we do as well. They didn't take into consideration the lessons that they were going to have to learn on this journey. And likewise, few of us do as well. I mean, if the Father, at the very beginning, when you were a new believer, had said, now, Joe, Sue, this is going to happen, and then that's going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then that, and that, and that, and that, and that. How many of you would have stopped and thought about it for a little bit? Yeah, I think that's an honest answer. It would have, at least for some anyway, given us pause if we understood at that point what is expected of us, because he expects a lot of us. To whom much is given, much is required. But here's my point. God always intended to take them to Mount Sinai. That was not plan B. That was always plan A. From the moment they left Egypt, he had always intended to take them to Mount Sinai. In fact, before Moses went down to speak to Pharaoh, he had already told Moses, as a sign, you're going to bring the people here and they're going to worship me on this mountain. But Sinai is about learning how to live in the land to which they were going. Learning how to trust him for the promise that he was going to give them. And it is to reform their way of thinking. We have to have our minds renewed. I believe that my mind is continually being renewed. I'm not the same person, thankfully, that I was a year ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. Thankfully, he's helping my mind to be renewed, and I'm coming to better understand, not that I've arrived, but I'm coming to better understand what's important to him, not what I think is important to him. Because as we draw closer to him, as we empty ourselves of self more and more and more, then we're going to understand what's in his heart, and that's what he puts in our heart to do. So all of this was a difficult journey, and I think part of it was made difficult so that it would be difficult to want to go back to Egypt. I mean, there were always those who were looking to go back. They were always looking for an opportunity, and had it been really easy, I think a lot of them would have tried to do it. For me, for Beth, we've gone through too much. I ain't going back and doing this all over again. You know, I'm not. There's too many things that we'd have to overcome working backward. And I'm thankful that he made it that way. And not that I want to. It's just that we got too much invested at this point, folks, to give up now. We've got too much invested, and he has too much invested in us for us to say this is too hard. Getting to within sight of the finish line and quitting doesn't count. That doesn't count. It is the one who endures to the end. That is the one who's to be saved. So he led them through the desert, and he put them in a place where they would have to learn to listen to his voice, to understand, to recognize his voice, and to trust in his voice. And so that experience required constant, even daily miracles in order for them to survive. And by putting them in this situation, as I said, they were inclined to listen. Let me show you this Hebrew word. We've talked about this probably multiple times. But this is the word midbar. Mem dalet bet resh. Reading from right to left. Mem dalet bet resh. Midbar. Wilderness. But those same four letters can be pronounced midaber. And midaber means to speak. And so it was in a wilderness experience that he chose to speak to them. He showed himself, demonstrated his might and his power when they were in Egypt and the plagues being poured out in Egypt. But when he got them out into the wilderness, he started speaking to them because they are inclined to listen. So the wilderness journey is so that he can speak to them. The wilderness journey is also a place where he can demonstrate that he gets involved not just in national affairs, but he gets involved in their daily lives. In other words, it's not just the dramatic events like the Exodus of coming out of Egypt or splitting the sea. It's not those things only, but he gives them manna 6 days out of 7. When they're thirsty, he opens up a rock and water comes gushing out of it. So he's involved not just in those grand national events, but also the intricate life of our details, or details of our life, excuse me. I have no problem believing that he split the sea. I have no problem believing that he poured out the plagues on Egypt. I have no problem believing that Yeshua rose from the dead. I have no problem believing in these miraculous things at all. Here's where Bill gets in trouble sometimes. Believing that he will meet my needs right now. Believing that he will do that for me, because I think of David and Moses and Isaiah and all these guys. I'm thinking, wow, they were righteous guys. And then I look in the mirror and I see me. Why would you do this for me? Well, now I want to go back to something I said earlier. If he has shown himself to be trustworthy because of where he brought me from and where he's brought me to, then he is trustworthy for the things that he's going to lead us into. He can be trusted to do those things that he's promised that he's going to do. And even those minute, seemingly insignificant details of my life. Israel had always depended on Pharaoh for those day-to-day things. They had always depended on Egypt for the fresh fish and the melons and the leeks and the cucumbers and all these different things. Hence the slave mentality. They were tied to that. And as I'm saying that, I want you to think not just in ancient terms, but I want you to think in modern terms. How dependent have we allowed ourselves to be on somebody else, or an institution, or an agency, or a this, or a that? How much have we allowed ourselves to grow dependent on those things to the point that were they quickly taken from us, we would be, at the very least, handicapped? Some of us perhaps immobilized. Now, I'm thankful that the Father has saw fit to work in and through people, even in institutions and agencies. But my point here is, after a while, it is human nature to grow dependent on those things and expect that they be here. And over time, some in the body, certainly many in the secular world, will unwittingly, over time, give their allegiance to that person, agency, institution, ideal, concept, what have you. So they had always depended on Pharaoh. They had this slave mentality. And that's coming up against the fact that he was now going to renew their minds to realize that he is the only one who should be sought out to be a source for anything. He is to be our one source. So in Psalm 121, verse 1, it says, I will lift up my eyes to the hills. I want to pause there. If you're in Jerusalem, particularly the old city or the city of David, if you look around, you'll find that to the east, to the south, to the west, you're surrounded by these hills. And so it's not really hard to imagine that, David's writing this and he's looking to the hills, he's looking in the mountains. The point being is that those hills around Jerusalem kind of offered a natural barrier and a defense, if you will. And so this is how I look at it anyway. He's considering these things that people would look at, man would look at as being something that's always going to be there and something that helps protect me. So as he's observing that, then he says this, but where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth, which includes those hills that he was looking to. All those things that we look to in the natural, he's acknowledging that these things are made by your hand. You're responsible for all of these things. So my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth, and he will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel, guards Israel, protects, defends Israel, shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The Lord shall not strike you by day, nor the sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. He shall preserve your soul. The Lord shall preserve your going out and your coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. Now, either that's true or we need to trash it. It's either true or it's not. And so in the days ahead, in the months ahead, and as things unfold in this world, we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. Things are, my view, moving kind of quickly in some ways. And who knows, but that at a certain point, we reach a tipping point and things just are happening on top of one another. That's going to really challenge our trust and our faith. But remember, he doesn't sleep. He doesn't slumber. The guardian of Israel is always watching over his people. When you and I lay down at night and rest, he's working on our behalf then. I'm going to tell this quick story. I think we've probably shared it before. But many years ago, I was in Israel. I was there for the Feast of Tabernacles. I was there for about a month. Brandon was in the first grade. And there was an accident at school. I can't even talk about it now too graphically, but he got his eye cut. I mean, sliced. And Beth took him to the eye doctor, and he couldn't see out of that particular eye. Was it the right or left? I forgot. Okay, she doesn't remember either. All right. It was one of the eyes. But he couldn't see out of it. And so that doctor wanted him to come back the next day and see another doctor. So they packed his eye. All right, I'm in Israel. I'm totally unaware that anything's happening. She's home dealing with this. And she tells the story a little more elaborately than I will today. But she just started marching up and down the hall, praying, rebuking the adversary, and claiming healing for our son. The next day, she takes him back to the doctor. The doctor puts him in the left eye. Okay, thank you. Takes him back to the doctor. They take all this wadding and this stuff out. They put him in a dark room and ask him to start reading a chart. He read off the line where you have 20/10 vision. The doctor said, I don't know what the other guy saw, but there's nothing wrong with his eye. My point is this. Not only did he heal him miraculously, but he did it, and I was completely unaware that he had done it. She was, but I wasn't. And so from my point of view, it just kind of amplifies the fact that the keeper of Israel, the guardian of Israel, doesn't go to sleep. He doesn't let his guard down. He doesn't slumber. He doesn't get distracted. Nothing takes him by surprise. And we have this promise that he will preserve us from all evil. That doesn't mean that we won't experience it and get contacted by it. It just means that we will be preserved from all evil, that he will preserve our soul, that he will preserve our going in and our going out and our coming in. And the psalmist says, from this point forward and for all time. And so again, either that is true or it isn't. And I'm staking my life on the fact that it's true. And so if so, I need to live my life in that way and not allow all the things that happen in this world shake my trust and my confidence in him. Because he is trustworthy, then we have to trust him to do what is in our best interest each and every day. And all that he commands us to do, whether we understand it or not, and there's a lot of things he commands that I frankly just do not understand. But whether we understand it or not, when he commands us to do this, don't do that, it is going to lead to life if we'll be obedient. Now, I know that there are some people, friends of mine, relations of mine, people that join us from time to time on our live stream, people that wander in here from time to time, who take the position that doing what is right in God's eyes, that's the way I would put it anyhow, or keeping his commandments. There are people who feel that that impedes life, that it even stands in the way sometimes of a livelihood. You know, like Shabbat, things like that. That it can actually stand in the way of me making a living. But I will remind those people that he fed them manna 6 days out of 7. And on the 6th day, he gave them a double portion. Why? so that they could do what he asked them to do, and with no loss to them. So when we acknowledge his sovereignty and we live according to that, there's always going to be an abundance. There's always going to be enough, sometimes more than enough. But the point is that we do not have to look at, well, if I follow him, it's going to cost me that. In terms of our flesh, our inclination, our carnal desires, it's going to cost us a lot. But in terms of the things that he knows that we need to live from day to day, it's not going to cost us in that way. It might put us in situations that we have to grow our trust and our confidence, but in the end, it's a way that leads to life. Again, he gave them manna 6 days out of 7, and he did that for how long? 40 years without fail. He only split the sea one time. All those others were every day, day after day. So all that he commands us to do leads to life, and that includes those unexpected turns in life. Because in this Torah portion, we see that Israel was commanded to turn and go a way that was unfamiliar and it was unorthodox. And so we're going to go to Exodus 14, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pehachirot, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Yul Brynner said, their God is not a good general. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am Yud-Heh-Vav, I am the Lord, and they did so. So this word that is translated for us, that they turn. The word turn is the word shuv. Shin vav beit, shuv, which is the root of teshuvah. And what does teshuvah mean? It's the word, we translate it repentance, but it comes from this root word that means to turn, or better, to return. If you're going the wrong way and you want to get in the right way, what do? You return. Now, in this particular case, there are some translations that have chosen to do just that, to translate it that he's saying, I want them to return. And so what would the implication be there? Go back. Go back to Egypt. Now, is he going to tell them to do that? No. So actually what he's doing here is he's telling them to turn, to take a detour. You're not going to go the way you thought you were going to go. You understand, Moses knew how to go from Egypt to Horeb. He's already made the journey there, and he's already made the journey back. He knows exactly how to get there. And so we do not read that when he first left Egypt and now coming back from Horeb to Egypt, we do not read that the Father split the sea for him to do that. So he didn't come that way. He went the way that everybody was familiar with. He knows that he's got to take them to Horeb. He's already been told that. It's going to be a sign. You're going to worship me on this mountain. So he knows where they're going. It's just that in these verses, the Father tells them, I want you to turn here. You're going to take a detour. You're not going to go the way you thought you were going to go. Again, I think that even took Moses by surprise. There is a point, I'm not going to read the verses here, but there is a point when they're standing at the sea and the people are, they're clamoring about Pharaoh's chariots closing them in, and there are no graves in Egypt, et cetera, et cetera. At some point, Moses must have said, though it's not recorded, he must have said, okay, what are we going to do here? Because it is recorded that God says to him, why are you speaking to me? Tell the people to go forward. Well, my response to that would have been, well, there is a sea in front of us. How are we supposed to do this? So, again, implying that maybe this even took Moses by surprise. Moses doesn't have everything figured out either. So he tells them to go a way that no one was expecting to go. The key word here is pihachirot, which literally means the mouth of the gorges. that was the place that he told them to go camp. And so if they're going to camp at the mouth of the gorges, that means they first have to do what? They have to walk through a gorge. They have to travel through a gorge or this deep rift in the earth. In that part of the world, they're typically called wadis. There are these dry riverbeds, and typically they're very deep, and there's a mountain wall on one side and a mountain wall on the other side, and these huge, very steep cliffs. You know, it's nothing gradual, at least the ones that I've been in. They're very deep. And by the way, this didn't happen to me, but it happened to a friend of mine. They were doing some exploring one of these wadis one time down around the area of Qumran, and they heard this loud roar, and somebody that was with them said, "We got to get out of here because there's this water coming down." It was coming down from the hills of Judea and just rushing down. "I need you to go in the pocket of my coat and grab my phone because my iPad just died." All right? So anyway, he is leading them through this gorge. I got it right here. Thank you. To take them to the mouth of this gorge. Give me just a moment here. Get myself situated. You know who I'm thinking about right now? No, I was thinking of Brad. Because when we would be places and something wouldn't happen just right, technically speaking, and he'd be going through his PowerPoints and such, and he'd get to the place he wanted to be, he'd go da 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 da. Anyway. All right, so he's going to lead them through a gorge. Boy, this is going to be interesting here. But that, I think, is on purpose because in that kind of a situation, they're not going to be able to turn to the right or to the left. They're going to have things on either side that's going to prevent them from going that way or that way. The only way they really can go is to go straight. Now, just as a sidebar here, Josephus actually describes the place that they went. And he says that it was surrounded, where they crossed the sea was surrounded by mountains. And there is, as most of you are aware, there is a lot of people who now are convinced that the Nuweiba Peninsula is probably where this crossing occurred, and it would have required for them to walk through the Wadi Watir, which is in Egypt, just not the traditional places that people have thought. And if we can get it worked out, you got me? Oh, thank you, sir. I'm glad that left eye's working good. He just gave me the stink eye, didn't he? Both of them. All right. The point is, they couldn't turn to the left or the right. And that is how he will lead us. He will put us in situations that we cannot turn to the left or to the right. And the only way we can go is straight. We just go forward. I'm not going back. The way back's too difficult. There's too much invested. The only way to go is to go forward. So later on, Moses will tell them this in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 32. Therefore you shall be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left, but you shall walk in all the ways which the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live, and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which you shall possess. And so to go the way that he would have us to go, where we cannot turn to the right or to the left, is the only way that leads to life. Now, do you think of it in the natural? They're coming out of Egypt. They know they're going to the promised land. Moses knows they got to first go by Mount Sinai. To take a detour, to turn in this way, and then to travel through a gorge with 2 to 3 million people would have been a little odd. In fact, this particular wadi, as I understand it, it's kind of wide when you go in, but it gets narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. And so this 2 to 3 million people are going to have to be squeezed more and more and more until they come out at the mouth of this thing. So when they get to the end of it, here's the sea in front of them. And about that time, dust is rising from behind them from the chariots of Pharaoh coming to pursue them. So this is a path that would have not seemed right to man. This would not have been the logical choice. The other wider, broader path that everyone is familiar with, that would have been the logical choice. But the way that seems right to us, where does it lead us to? To destruction. Because see, if they had taken that other wider, broader path, so could Pharaoh. And Pharaoh would have been able to more easily maneuver, surround them, and destroy them. As it turns out, he's got to go in the gorge too, and he's kind of bottled in as well, and he doesn't have anywhere to go except, if he's going to pursue them, forward. And so he's thinking their God has led them into a trap. They don't know what they're doing. The wilderness has shut them in. And he doesn't think twice about it. He pursues them. And as it turns out, they're not the ones who have been led into a death trap. It's Pharaoh who's been led into that death trap. But back to what they were thinking, or probably thinking at the time, pressure is mounting. They're cut off by Pharaoh's chariots. They can't go back. They can't turn to the right. They can't turn to the left. They're in this very narrow, troublesome passageway, and the only way that they could go was forward. And so it seems to me that there probably would have been people who, about this time, would say, is this guy Moses the right one to lead us? Moses, can I take a look at that map? Did you take a wrong turn here somewhere? Now, I think it was Dan that pointed out a couple of weeks ago that Moses, remember, was raised as a prince of Egypt. And being a prince of Egypt, he would have been trained in military tactics. I think, wasn't you that was saying that he was, there was other writings that talk about how he had victories in Ethiopia and different things. And so he was a military-minded person. So you would think that this military training would have said, this is not the right way to go, because we're going to be hemmed in. But Moses had to trust the Father, just like everybody else had to trust the Father. He had to trust that the Father was leading them as a shepherd leads a flock, just as surely as the Father had called him to lead that flock. So again, from a natural, logical, reasonable point of view, it looks like they're going the wrong way. But as it turns out, they're going the only way that leads to life. So in our lives, sometimes we feel like we are led to turn off the route that we thought we were going to be on. There have been times that we've taken what seemed to others to be detours. You know, when you started keeping Sabbath and eating clean and keeping feast days, and everybody thought that you were losing your faith, and that you had denounced the Messiah, and that you'd gone off into a cult, and now you had converted to Judaism and all these kinds of things. You're familiar with that idea. And I would suspect that in our lives there are more situations like that yet to come. But if we are truly following him, then we must truly trust him that what he has started, he's going to complete. And so as we are in these situations and we're forced to trust him more perhaps than we ever have, then just be on guard that it's in those times when fear and uncertainty and doubt is going to arise. And it's fear and doubt about what he's going to do, or is he going to do it, that can provoke us to want to take matters back into our own hands. You know, go back to Egypt. Go back to what's familiar. I know what I'm going to do. I don't know what he's going to do. That's what I always told my kids driving. I know that you think you've got this all under control, but that guy's crazy over there. So even if you think you're going to do this and you got this all under control driving, just always assume that guy's nuts, because you don't know what he's going to do. Well, in a totally opposite way, sometimes we don't know what he's going to do. And then that's when the question marks come, and then the doubts might try to creep in, and then we're provoked to take matters back into our own hands. Don't return to Egypt. Now, if you push it, and you really want to take matters into your own hands, I can speak from experience. He will let you. Oh, you think you can handle it? Go right ahead. But I want us to remember there is a way that seems right unto man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. And that's not just talking about wicked men. It doesn't say just wicked men. There is a way that seems right to me, but the end usually ends up being the wrong place. And so once again, God led them on the only path that led to life, though at that point in time they could not realize it. And so they had to trust him even as they obeyed him, doing things they did not understand. So in verse 11 of chapter 14, it says, they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us this way, to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. My translation of that is this: the journey's too tough. I'd just rather be a slave. At least I know what every day is going to be. I'm not going to be challenged in any other way different than I've already been challenged. I've kind of grown accustomed to it. It's familiar to me. I'll just stick with that, because this following God, this invisible God, we can't see him, this is hard, because it forces me to trust him in a different way every day, and this is just too tough. That's my translation of basically what they were saying. They would prefer slavery over freedom if freedom requires faith and courage. I want to say that again. Some people would just prefer to be slaves to a system if faith is going to require them to have courage to trust. To these people, Moses said in verse 13, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the Yeshuat, the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. So here comes Pharaoh following after them. He saw them take the detour. He thinks their God's not a good general. The wilderness has shut them in. They're just wandering around, don't know where they're going, don't know what they're doing. And that Migdol and Baal-Zephon, actually those were Egyptian outposts. And so he's getting signals of where they're at. He's getting reports and reconnaissance of where they're at. And so he concludes they're headed right to the sea. We've got them now. And so he rushes in. I bet you he thought, when I get over there and I get them cornered, they're going to be begging for me to take them back as slaves. But they can beg all they want. I'm not going to take them back as slaves. I'm going to annihilate them. He's intending to slaughter them. Now, who orchestrated all of this? He did. And he allowed Pharaoh to think this in part because he wants Pharaoh to think they're lost. He wants Pharaoh to think that they're being led into a death trap. And in some ways we could argue that God is strengthening Pharaoh's heart to do just this, because this is on the heels of all these plagues. And the last one, he said, get out, take your children, take everybody, get out. Go serve the Lord as you said. And so apparently he's recovered from all of this now. And he was doing what was always in his heart to do. But you see, God had determined to get honor on Pharaoh. He wanted his people to see, and he wanted the Egyptians to know, that there is no God but the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He demonstrates this to his people, and he makes it clear that he's in control of every situation. It might look like Pharaoh is breathing down your neck. It might look like Pharaoh has got all power, all control, and he's doing whatever he wants to do, and his intention is to make your life miserable, to destroy you if he could. But I'm going to make it clear to Pharaoh and to you, my people, that I am completely in control of the situation. And when I'm done, you're going to be freed from the connection to Pharaoh for all time. The connection to Egypt is going to be broken once and for all. In that day, all the world will know that he is the Lord. So, hope you were listening to what I just said there. Because if that was his method in times past, should I not expect that that will be his method today and in the future? Should I not expect to see that there will be wicked men and women who are in pursuit of God's people who think we've got them now? We've got power, we've got influence, we've got tactics, we've got them now, they're trapped. They plot, they scheme, they try to maneuver. But the reality is, he says, I will get honor on Pharaoh so that everybody's going to know that I've always been in control. I never lost control. Now, for you and I, it's going to be really important to hear that voice if he says, or when he says, turn. Don't go that way. I know that's the way that you're accustomed to, that you're familiar with, that seems right to you. I know that. Don't go that way. Turn. Because that's the one and only way that leads to life. The term Pichachirot, according to some commentators, should be rendered not the mouth of the gorges, but the mouth of freedom. Because the word Hachirot comes from a term Charat. Is that on the board? Yes. Chet Resh Tav. Charat. And it means to engrave or to bore through something that's really, really hard. Implying that the path that the Father was going to take them down was intended to bore through their hardened hearts as well. What did they just said? You brought us out here to kill us, didn't you, Moses? Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you would want to bring us out here and let us die in the wilderness? So he's about to do something that is going to bore through their hardened hearts, and it's going to engrave something that is eternal upon their heart, and that is this. The one and only road that leads to life is the one and only road that leads to true freedom and genuine liberty. There were many of his people who thought that we're going to die, but they lived. There were many of his people who thought, well, this is it. We're done. We're toast. It's over. And it wasn't. They lived. They survived. They celebrated once again. Instead, it was Pharaoh and all of his that perished. His army, his chariots, they perished. And so what seemed to some to be a detour, a wrong turn, actually was the one and only way that led to life. I know I've shared this before as well, and I'll be brief with it. But when you consider that Israel coming out of Egypt and then being told to turn to go into this straight and narrow path, as it were, this gorge, to me, it's like the child descending into the birth canal. Because we know that the Father referred to Israel as his son, even his firstborn. And in Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, he said, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. And so just as every child who's going to come into this world before the days of sections, they would have to descend into the birth canal. And even with C-sections, I think they have to wait to a certain point, right? Moms, don't they? Anyway, the idea is the child has to descend into the birth canal. And the birth canal for mom is labor and travail and contractions. But what is it for the child? Labor, travail, and contractions. Because this child is now being forced to leave what was warm, comfortable, and familiar, forced into this straight and narrow path, and endure all of this in order for the child to be born. And so where Israel is concerned, my view is he brought them into this gorge. That's the birth canal. And when he split the sea in two, the waters broke. And out of Egypt, I have called my son. So then, think of it this way in your life. Why do things change? Why are all the things that I'm familiar with changing, disappearing? Why are the things that I'm comfortable with getting upset, being interrupted? Why can't we just park it and leave it that way for a little while? because the connection to Egypt and to Pharaoh has to be interrupted. And eventually, there comes a day when it has to be severed once and for all. So these contractions are kind of forcing me out of my comfortable space. But remember, through that, Moses told the children of Israel, the Lord's going to fight for you. Now, the way he did it then was this pillar of cloud got between Egypt and Israel, and it was light to the Hebrews, and it was darkness to the Egyptians. If Pharaoh had been a good general, he would have said, boys, I'm out of here. We're going back to the house. But he just couldn't leave it alone, right? That would have been enough for me. That would have settled it right then and there. But if I was on the other side where it was light and this cloud was between us and our enemies, man, I tell you what, I would have been, what's next? Something's getting ready to happen. All right. He said, the Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Now, here's what that says to me. What he's about to do is going to be so awesome when he delivers you, you're not going to have words. You're going to be stunned into silence. You're just going to be overwhelmed with awe at what he's done. Because you know you didn't do it, and they didn't do it, and Moses didn't do it, and they couldn't do it. There's only one who can, and you're just going to be dumbfounded. So here's a familiar portion of Scripture, Psalm 46, 10 and 11. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob, he is our refuge. Selah. And so in the days ahead, I fully anticipate that we are going to be amazed at some of the things that we will see. Now, I've been amazed at some of the stuff I've seen, but it hadn't kept me silent, if you catch my drift. But he's saying that there are going to be things that happen that you won't know what to say. I won't know what to say. We won't know what to say, because we're just going to hold our peace. We're just going to be amazed at what he does. I believe that. I'm choosing to believe that. I'm choosing to hold on to that. And I don't know what that means. And don't read anything into that, especially if you read it on Facebook first. Because he never does what we think he's going to do. Yes. Amen. Right? Yes. He never does what we think he's going to do, or the way we think he's going to do it. Maybe that's the better way to phrase it. And he never does it when we think he's going to do it. Right? Never, ever, ever, ever. But he does what he promised he would do. And when he does, then we will know that he is the Lord. Now, it's important, though, if we're going to see that, it's important that we are in the right place at the right time, which means it's important that we hear that voice that says, don't go that way, turn. And if we take the path that he leads us, then we'll be in the right place to see those things. We'll be there at the right time. If we refuse, if we take matters into our own hands, we'll end up on the wrong path. And we won't be in the place where he's fighting for us. We'll be in the place that we chose. I don't want to do that. It's going to be crucial that we hear his voice, that we are able to filter out all the other voices. Because my sheep, they know my voice. But it seems to me that not only do his sheep have to know his voice, they have to heed his voice. And sometimes he's going to ask us to do things that go against our reason, that goes against our logic, that goes against the way we've always done it in the past. It doesn't mean necessarily that what we did it in the past was wrong. It just means that it's not right for now. Because if we are in that place where he wants us to be, we will see that he fights for us and that he delivers us. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 47. Then all of this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear. I'm going to offend some people here. Not purposely, But the Lord does not save with the ballot box either. The battle is the Lord's. Did he just say that we're not supposed to vote? No, I didn't say that. I'm just saying that as his people, we don't put our trust and confidence in anything fashioned and crafted by man. That's not how he fights for us. He fights for us his way because the battle is his. Psalm 34, verse 6 and 7. This poor man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps all around those who fear him, and he delivers them. And I personally, that verse right there, my wife and I have experienced, we've witnessed how he indeed encamps around those that fear him, and he delivers them. And when he did, we were like awestruck to see that, yes, he did it for Abraham and he did it for David, and look, he did it for you too. And he will do it for you. So there are these unexpected turns in our life. They take us by surprise. Sometimes they cause us to doubt, to be uncertain. But if we're following him, if we truly do hear his voice, if we're being guided by his Spirit, then we're going to have to trust that he's directing our path. And it will be straight, it will be narrow, it will be troublesome. If you're looking for a greased skid where there are no problems and you think that's the Lord, you're probably on the wrong path. I'm just saying that everything he causes us to do or leads us into, it challenges my flesh. It challenges my will. It challenges my carnal inclinations. If it's not doing that, I'm probably on the wrong path. Thank you all, two of you. But if we follow the path that he places us on, we will in time, we'll be able to look back and we'll see his wisdom, and we'll be able to look back and see his purpose in all of it. So I'll close with this. Psalm 37, verse 22. For those blessed by him shall inherit the earth, but those cursed by him shall be cut off. The steps of a good man, a tzaddik, a righteous man, one who's trying to do what's right. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. He prepared those steps. Every single one of them. The ones that were joyous and accompanied with celebration, and even those that were stressful and accompanied with tears. He ordered those steps, and he delights in his way. Though he fall, you and me, though he fall, he shall not utterly be cast down, but the Lord upholds him with his hand. So my closing thought here is this. I'm not going to make the statement that everything I've ever done, God orchestrated, because I know that there's a lot of things I did all on my own. However, I will say that when he has caused good to come from those things, it was to put me back on that path that he had already prepared for me. In fact, in some cases, it provoked me to find that path again and to understand that there are things that happen in our life that whether we orchestrated them or whether he ordained them, he can take all those things and cause good to come from it that affect his purpose for us. Because it's never too late for us to be at the right place at the right time. As long as we draw breath, there is potential. There is that purpose that we can fulfill as an individual, as a family, as a congregation. Amen? Father, we thank you, again, that you love us, that you care about us. We thank you, Father, that you, as a shepherd, the only good shepherd, sometimes you lead us with gentle nudges. Sometimes you have to provoke us with a goad to our rump to get our attention, to move into the right direction, to get on the right path, the one that leads to green pasture, the one that leads to living waters, the one that leads to life and blessing and prosperity according to your purpose and will. Father, I pray that these things that we know in our minds would be things that we know in our hearts, and that they would permeate our being so that we would not be shaken by the news of the day, that we would not be dumbfounded by what men do, but that it would simply remind us that our Father is in control of all. He not only controls the destiny of nations, but he controls my destiny as well. Help us to never doubt why you bring us out of a situation. Cause us, Father, to never doubt when you take us down a path we did not expect, one that challenges us more than we oftentimes want to be challenged. But through it all, that we trust you, we believe you, because we know that you love us. May we love you in that way. These things we pray and ask, we believe you for, because we come to you in Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen. Beth.